April 19th, 1943. Lyon, France. Gestapo headquarters, Hôtel Terminus. Klaus Barbie sat behind a polished desk in a second-floor interrogation room, reviewing a file on an American OSS operative captured 3 days earlier. The file was thin. Name, rank, date of capture. No useful intelligence yet. The American had said nothing during preliminary questioning. Professional resistance. Expected from Office of Strategic Services personnel. Barbie was 29 years old, SS Hauptsturmführer, head of the Gestapo's 4th section in Lyon. His jurisdiction covered counterintelligence, resistance, suppression, and interrogation of enemy agents. He had held the position for 11 months. In that time, he had built a reputation: efficient, thorough, willing to use whatever methods produced results. The room was furnished simply. 1 desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a small table with interrogation tools arranged neatly. Barbie preferred order. Clean spaces. Procedures. Everything documented, everything justified under the framework of security operations. The war demanded efficiency. Sentiment was a luxury Germany could not afford. Outside the window, Lyon stretched beneath grey spring skies. The Rhône River cut through the city, its bridges guarded by German checkpoints. Wehrmacht troops patrolled the streets. French police collaborated with occupation authorities. The city functioned under German control. Resistance cells operated in shadows, but Barbie's network of informants was extensive. Names were extracted. Networks were rolled up. Lyon was considered one of the most secure cities in occupied France. Barbie had joined the SS in 1935, aged 22, attracted by the organization's elite status and ideological clarity. He believed in National Socialism, not the crude racial hatred of street thugs, but the systematic reorganization of Europe under German leadership. Order, discipline, strength, these were values, worth fighting for. His career had advanced steadily. Police training in Berlin, counterintelligence work in Amsterdam, transfer to Lyon in June 1942. Each assignment had taught him that security required hard measures. Interrogations, deportations, executions. These were tools of statecraft, necessary instruments in total war. Barbie did not enjoy cruelty. He considered himself a professional, but he recognized that information had value, and extracting information sometimes required force. The American operative, Lieutenant William Hopper, had been captured during a botched mission near Villeurbanne. Hopper had been attempting to meet with French resistance contacts when German security forces surrounded the location. Brief firefight. Hopper wounded in the shoulder. Captured alive. His papers identified him as a liaison officer, but Barbie knew OSS personnel rarely carried accurate documents. Hopper had been held in the basement cells of Hôtel Terminus for 72 hours. Standard procedure: isolation, minimal food, no sleep, psychological pressure before formal interrogation began. Barbie had reviewed the preliminary reports. Hopper had given only name, rank, and serial number, Geneva Convention requirements. Nothing more. Barbie understood the calculation. Hopper believed that if he held out long enough, the information he possessed would become obsolete. Resistance contacts would relocate. Mission plans would change. His silence would protect his network. It was logical. It was also incorrect. Barbie had methods that produced results regardless of how long subjects resisted. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. That morning, Barbie had ordered Hopper brought upstairs. The interrogation would be methodical. Start with conversation. Establish that cooperation was possible. Offer small concessions. Food, medical attention, warm a cell. Then, if cooperation was not forthcoming, escalate. Pain was predictable. Applied systematically, it overwhelmed resistance. 2 guards escorted Hopper into the room at 0900 hours. The American moved stiffly, shoulder bandaged, face pale from blood loss and lack of sleep. He was 26 years old, brown hair, medium build, regular features. He looked ordinary. That was part of OS training. Blend in. Appear unremarkable. Hopper sat when directed, saying nothing. Barbie opened the file. He spoke in careful English, accent slight but noticeable. Lieutenant Hopper, you have been cooperative so far. This will make things easier. Hopper stared at the wall behind Barbie's head. His expression was blank. Barbie continued, I understand you are following training. Name, rank, serial number. This is acceptable under Geneva Convention. However, you are not a uniformed combatant captured on a battlefield. You are an intelligence operative captured during clandestine operations. Different rules apply. Hopper said nothing. Barbie made a note in the file. Subject, maintaining silence. Expected. He looked up. We have time, Lieutenant. You believe if you delay, your information becomes worthless. This is partially true. But we also have your contacts. We have locations. We have schedules. What we need from you is confirmation, details. Your cooperation will determine how this proceeds. Still nothing. Barbie closed the file and leaned back. His tone remained calm, almost conversational. You have family in Pennsylvania. Father is a physician. Mother teaches school. You have a younger sister, Margaret. She is 17. Your file indicates you enlisted in 1941, immediately after Pearl Harbor. Officer training at Fort Benning, recruited by OSS in early 1942. Parachute training. Intelligence tradecraft, deployed to North Africa, then France. Hopper's jaw tightened slightly. Barbie noticed. Personal information created, anxiety. It demonstrated reach, capability, the illusion that nothing was private. Your training was thorough, Barbie continued, but training cannot prepare you for reality. You are injured, exhausted, isolated. Your mission has failed. Your contacts are compromised. Continuing to resist serves no purpose. Hopper finally spoke, voice hoarse from dehydration. Name, Lieutenant William Hopper. Serial number, 04328967. Barbie sighed, a small theatrical gesture of disappointment. Very well. We will continue differently. He stood, walked to the small table, and selected a pair of pliers from the arranged tools. He held them up, letting Hopper see them clearly. These methods are unpleasant, but they are effective. You will speak eventually. Everyone does. The question is whether you speak now or after unnecessary suffering. Hopper's breathing quickened. Fear was visible now, tightening his shoulders, widening his eyes. But he said nothing. Barbie nodded to the guards. They pulled Hopper from the chair and forced him onto his knees. What followed over the next 6 hours was documented in Gestapo files as enhanced interrogation. The specific methods need not be detailed here. Pain was applied systematically. Hopper screamed. He begged. He lost consciousness twice and was revived with cold water. But he provided no useful intelligence. By late afternoon, Barbie ordered him returned to his cell. Hopper could barely walk. The guards dragged him down the stairs. Barbie washed his hands carefully, then returned to his desk to write the report. Subject demonstrated extreme resistance. Further sessions recommended. Escalation authorized if necessary. He filed the report, locked his office, and went home to his apartment on Rue de l'Hôtel de Ville. Dinner was waiting. His girlfriend, Régine, had prepared rabbit stew. They ate quietly. Barbie said nothing about his day. Work stayed at work. Over the following weeks, Hopper endured repeated interrogations. Each session followed the same pattern. Questions, silence, pain, return to cell. Dates, methods, duration, results. The documentation was meticulous. Barbie believed records demonstrated professionalism. Everything justified, everything procedural. But Hopper never broke. Eventually, after 18 days, he was transferred to a prisoner of war camp in Germany. Barbie considered the interrogation a partial failure. No actionable intelligence had been extracted. However, the process itself served a purpose. Other captured operatives heard what happened to Hopper. Fear was useful. It softened resistance. It encouraged cooperation. Barbie continued his work in Lyon. More arrests, more interrogations, more deportations. The Jewish population of Lyon was systematically rounded up and sent east. Resistance fighters were executed. Collaborators were rewarded. The system functioned efficiently. Barbie rose to the rank of SS Hauptsturmführer and was awarded the Iron Cross First Class for his counterintelligence work. By the summer of 1944, the war was turning. Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6th. The Eastern Front was collapsing. Germany was retreating on all fronts. But in Lyon, Barbie continued operations until mid-August. Then orders came. Evacuate. The Allies were approaching. Wehrmacht units were withdrawing eastward. Lyon would fall within days. Barbie destroyed files, packed essential records, and departed Lyon on August 24, 1944, just hours before American forces entered the city. He moved east with retreating German units, assignment changing as the military situation deteriorated. By 1945, he was attached to security operations in southern Germany, no longer running networks, just surviving the collapse. April 30th, 1945. The war in Europe ended 8 days later. Germany surrendered unconditionally. Barbie was captured by American forces in Bavaria on May 10, 1945. He gave a false name. Albrecht Becker claimed to be a low-ranking Wehrmacht clerk. The chaos of immediate post-war Germany made verification difficult. Millions of displaced persons, millions of former soldiers, records were destroyed or inaccessible. Barbie's deception worked initially. He was processed as a regular prisoner of war, sent to a holding camp near Munich. Conditions were Spartan, but not brutal. Basic rations, overcrowded tents, minimal medical care. But Geneva Convention standards were observed. Barbie kept his head down, said little. Around him, former SS officers were being identified and separated for special handling. War crimes investigations were beginning. Denazification tribunals were being established. Barbie knew his real identity would eventually surface. When it did, consequences would be severe. In the camp, rations were distributed twice daily. Soup, bread, occasionally coffee. The portions were small, calculated to sustain life but not comfort. Prisoners lost weight. Hunger became constant. Barbie, like thousands of others, learned what it meant to exist on the edge of adequate nutrition. He had never experienced hunger before. His wartime service had ensured regular meals. Gestapo officers ate well. German occupation forces had access to France's agricultural abundance. Shortages affected civilians, not security personnel. Now, in an American POW camp, Barbie stood in line twice daily, metal cup in hand, waiting for soup that was mostly water. The bread was dense, difficult to chew, barely enough to quiet the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. He ate slowly, making each portion last. Around him, men did the same. Former soldiers, former officers, men who had commanded divisions now shuffling through mud for a ladle of thin broth. Months passed. Summer became autumn. Autumn became winter. The cold in 1945, 1946 was brutal. The camp had insufficient heating. Prisoners slept under thin blankets, huddled together for warmth. Frostbite was common. Illness spread. Medical supplies were scarce. The American authorities were overwhelmed. Millions of displaced persons needed processing. Resources were stretched. Barbie remained unidentified through the end of 1945. But in January 1946, a list of names was circulated. Former Gestapo officers wanted for war crimes. Klaus Barbie's name was on that list. Detailed description, service record, photograph. French authorities had provided documentation. Survivors had given testimony. Barbie's activities in Lyon were documented extensively. On February 3, 1946, American military police entered the camp with the list. They moved through the barracks, checking faces against photographs. Barbie was identified within an hour, pulled from formation, hands bound. separated from the general POW population, transferred to a special detention facility for suspected war criminals. The new facility was more secure. Smaller cells, constant guard surveillance. Interrogations began immediately. American counterintelligence corps officers questioned him extensively. They had files, witness statements, documentation from French resistance survivors, testimony from former prisoners. The evidence was substantial. Barbie initially denied everything. Wrong person, mistaken identity. But the interrogators were thorough. They confronted him with photographs. He could not explain them. They presented documents bearing his signature. He could not deny them. After 3 weeks, he stopped denying his identity. Klaus Barbie, former SS Hauptsturmführer, head of Gestapo operations in Lyon, June 1942 through August 1944, but he insisted his actions had been lawful under occupation regulations. Security operations, counterintelligence, work, everything documented, everything procedural. He had followed orders, maintained discipline, done his duty as a German officer. The interrogators were unimpressed. They focused on specific cases: torture of prisoners, deportation of Jewish children, execution of resistance fighters without trial. Barbie's responses became defensive. Those were different times. War requires difficult decisions. I was following orders. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Americans transferred him to French custody in May 1946. French authorities wanted him tried in France for crimes committed in Lyon. The evidence was overwhelming. Survivors had identified him. Records documented his operations. Witnesses described specific torture sessions, specific deportations, specific executions. Barbie was held in military prison near Paris, awaiting trial. But the trial did not happen. Not in 1946. Political complications arose. The emerging Cold War changed priorities. Western intelligence services became interested in Barbie's knowledge of communist networks in occupied France. He had interrogated communist resistance fighters. He possessed information about Soviet intelligence operations. That information had value. In 1947, Barbie was quietly removed from French custody and transferred to American intelligence control. The transfer was unofficial. French authorities were told he had escaped. In reality, he was working for American counterintelligence corps, providing information about communist networks in Europe. His war crimes were set aside. Expedients replaced justice. Barbie's situation improved significantly. He was no longer a prisoner. He was an intelligence asset. He received regular pay, better accommodations, adequate food for the first time since his capture. He worked as an informant and analyst, identifying former communists, tracking Soviet intelligence activities. The work was familiar. He had done similar operations during the war. But the arrangement could not last forever. French authorities continued demanding his extradition. Pressure increased. By 1951, American intelligence decided Barbie had become more liability than asset. They could not return him to France. He knew too much about American intelligence operations. The solution was escape. Facilitate his departure to South America, where he could disappear. In March 1951, Barbie was provided with false documents, new identity, Klaus Altmann, passage arranged to Bolivia via Italy. American intelligence assisted every step. By April 1951, he was living in La Paz, Bolivia. New country, new life. No prosecution, no consequences for his actions in Lyon. Barbie lived in Bolivia for 32 years. He established himself as Klaus Altmann, businessman. He worked in various enterprises, timber, shipping. Eventually, security consulting for the Bolivian military government. He married, had children, built a comfortable middle-class life in La Paz. The war became distant. Lyon became a memory he rarely discussed. But in France, the memory remained sharp. Survivors never forgot. Families of deportees never stopped seeking justice. Organizations documented Nazi war crimes. They compiled evidence. They tracked suspects. Klaus Barbie's name appeared repeatedly in their files. The butcher of Lyon, torturer, mass murderer, still alive, still unpunished. French investigators discovered his location in 1971. Klaus Altmann of La Paz was Klaus Barbie of Lyon. The evidence was conclusive. Fingerprints matched. Photographs matched. Handwriting analysis confirmed identity. France formally requested extradition. Bolivia refused. Altmann was a naturalized Bolivian citizen. Bolivian law prohibited extraditing citizens. Political pressure increased. Throughout the 1970s, human rights organizations publicized the case. Journalists investigated. Television documentaries exposed Barbie's past. The Bolivian government faced international condemnation for harboring a war criminal, but successive military governments protected him. Barbie had provided services to Bolivian security forces. He had trained interrogators. He had advised on counterinsurgency operations. He was useful. Therefore, he was protected. The situation changed in 1982. Bolivia's military government collapsed. Democracy was restored. The new civilian government reviewed the Barbie case under different priorities: international law, human rights, justice for victims. On January 25, 1983, Bolivian authorities arrested Klaus Altmann. 5 weeks later, on February 5, 1983, he was expelled from Bolivia and flown to France. French authorities were waiting at Lyon airport. Barbie was taken directly to Montluc prison, the same prison where he had held prisoners during the occupation. He was placed in a cell. The irony was noted by survivors who had been held in the same facility 40 years earlier. His trial was scheduled for May 1987. 4 years of pre-trial proceedings, evidence gathering, witness preparation, legal arguments. The case was complex. Crimes committed 45 years earlier. Documentary evidence from multiple countries. Hundreds of potential witnesses. During those 4 years, Barbie remained in Montluc prison. Conditions were humane. French prison standards required adequate food, medical care, legal representation. Barbie received all of these. His cell was small but clean. He had access to newspapers, books, occasional visits. His lawyers argued vigorously. Statute of limitations, lack of jurisdiction, procedural irregularities. Every legal challenge was exhausted, but the evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from survivors. Documents bearing his signature. Gestapo records recovered from German archives. Lists of deportees. Execution orders. Torture reports. Everything documented meticulously, preserved through decades, now presented in court. The trial began on May 11, 1987. Palais de Justice, Lyon. The courtroom was packed. Survivors, families of victims, journalists, historians. Security was extensive. Barbie sat behind bulletproof glass, flanked by guards. The prosecution presented its case methodically. 41 separate charges: crimes against humanity, murder, torture, deportation. Each charge supported by documentary evidence and witness testimony. Survivors testified about specific interrogations, specific torture sessions. They described the room, the tools, Barbie's voice, his methods. Some identified him directly. That man, he tortured me. Barbie's defense argued he had been following orders, wartime security operations, legitimate military necessity. But French law recognized no statute of limitations for crimes against humanity. The defense of superior orders was rejected. Individual responsibility remained. The trial lasted 9 weeks, 55 days of testimony, hundreds of witnesses, thousands of pages of documents. On July 4, 1987, the verdict was delivered. Guilty on all counts. Sentence: life imprisonment. Barbie was transferred to St. Joseph Prison in Lyon, maximum security facility. He would remain there until his death. No possibility of parole. No early release. He was 73 years old. His health was declining. Cancer had been diagnosed during pre-trial detention. Treatment was provided, but the prognosis was poor. In prison, Barbie's life contracted to a small cell, measured routines, declining health. He received 3 meals daily, standard prison rations, sufficient nutrition, adequate calories, nothing special, nothing luxurious, simple food delivered on a tray through a slot in the door. He ate alone. Prison. Regulations isolated high-profile inmates. The food was unremarkable. Soup, bread, occasionally meat, vegetables when available, coffee in the morning, water with meals. Everything met minimum nutritional standards. Everything was clean, safe, properly prepared. It was institutional food, designed for function rather than pleasure. But it was regular, predictable, guaranteed. Barbie ate mechanically. Hunger was no longer a concern. The constant, gnawing emptiness he had experienced in the POW camp 40 years earlier was gone. Prison provided certainty. 3 meals, every day. No waiting in line, no uncertainty, no competition. Just food, delivered, consumed, taken away. The routine became background, automatic, unthinking, but sometimes, in moments of reflection that came unbidden in the silence of his cell, Barbie would remember. Lyon, the interrogation rooms, the prisoners he had questioned, the methods he had used. He had eaten well then. Gestapo officers did not go hungry. French. Restaurants served occupation personnel. Wine, cheese, proper meals. He had taken it for granted, and he remembered the POW camp, 1945, 1946, thin soup, hard bread, standing in line with hundreds of other men, waiting for a ladle of broth, the humiliation of hunger, the desperation of needing food and depending on the enemy to provide it. He had hated that dependence. It had stripped away dignity, reduced him to basic animal need. Now, in French prison, he was dependent again. But the dependence felt different, clinical, procedural. The French state fed him not out of mercy, but because law required it. Prisoners received food, medical care, shelter. These were rights, not favors. Barbie understood the distinction. Rights were impersonal. Mercy required humanity. In December 1987, a journalist requested an interview. Prison authorities approved. The journalist asked Barbie about his trial, his conviction, his regrets. Barbie spoke, carefully, choosing words with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime calculating effect. He acknowledged his service in Lyon. He did not deny his actions, but he framed them as wartime necessity, security operations. Every nation does the same during war, the journalist pressed. What about the torture, the deportations, the children sent to death camps? Barbie's expression hardened. He had heard these questions before, during interrogation, during trial. Now in prison. His answer remained consistent. I was a soldier. I followed orders. The circumstances were different then. You cannot judge wartime actions by peacetime standards. The journalist asked if he felt remorse. Barbie paused. The question required careful navigation. Expressing remorse might suggest guilt beyond what he was willing to acknowledge. Denying it entirely would confirm the monster the prosecution had portrayed. He chose ambiguity. I regret many things. War creates situations no one wants. But I did. My duty, as I understood it. The interview was published in January 1988. Survivors reacted with anger. His refusal to express genuine remorse confirmed what they had always known. Barbie felt no guilt. He saw himself as a professional who had performed unpleasant but necessary tasks. The victims were abstractions, casualties of war, acceptable losses in pursuit of larger objectives. Prison life continued. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Barbie's health deteriorated. The cancer was advancing. Doctors provided treatment, but it was palliative rather than curative. Pain medication, symptom management, comfort measures. By 1990, he required constant medical supervision. He was moved to the prison infirmary. A bed replaced his cell. Nurses checked on him regularly. Meals were adjusted to accommodate his declining ability to eat. In the infirmary, Barbie had more time to think. fewer distractions. The television in the common area was out of reach. Books became difficult as his vision failed. He lay in bed, consciousness drifting between present and past. Sometimes he was in Lyon again, walking through Hôtel Terminus, reviewing files, conducting interrogations. The memories were vivid, detailed, disturbingly clear. Other times he was in the POW camp, standing in line, waiting for food, watching American guards distribute rations with mechanical efficiency. He remembered the humiliation, the dependence, the recognition that he was powerless, that survival required accepting food from those he had considered enemies. And he remembered Hopper, Lieutenant William Hopper, OSS operative, the American he had interrogated in April 1943. Hopper had resisted. 6 hours of interrogation, systematic application of pain. Hopper had screamed, begged, lost consciousness, but he had given nothing. Barbie had filed a report noting Hopper's extreme resistance. At the time, he had viewed it as professional assessment. Subject demonstrated exceptional training. Further escalation recommended. Now, decades later, lying in a prison infirmary, dying of cancer, Barbie wondered if Hopper had survived the war, if he had returned to Pennsylvania, if he remembered Lyon, if he remembered the interrogation room. The tools arranged on the table. The questions asked in careful English. In June 1991, prison authorities informed Barbie that an American veteran had requested to visit. The request was unusual. Victims' families sometimes visited, expressing anger or seeking closure. But an American veteran was unexpected. Barbie's lawyers reviewed the request. The visitor's name was William Hopper, former OSS operative, captured in Lyon in April 1943, tortured by Klaus Barbie, transferred to POW camp, liberated in April 1945. Barbie agreed to the visit. Curiosity, perhaps something else, a desire to confront the past directly, to see what had become of the man he had broken, or tried to break, in that interrogation room 48 years earlier. The visit was scheduled for June 17, 1991. Hopper arrived at St. Joseph Prison at 1400 hours. He was 74 years old, grey hair, slight stoop, walking with a cane, but his eyes were sharp, alert, focused. Prison guards escorted him to the infirmary. Barbie was sitting in a chair beside his bed, wearing prison clothes, thin from illness, face pale. Hopper stopped at the doorway. For a long moment, the two men looked at each other. Recognition was immediate. Despite the decades, despite the physical changes, they knew each other. Hopper entered slowly. A guard remained nearby, observing. Hopper sat in the chair across from Barbie. Neither man spoke immediately. The silence stretched, heavy with history. Finally, Hopper spoke in English. "You don't remember me." It was not a question. Barbie responded in the same language, accent still present, but softer now. "I remember. April 1943. Lyon. You were OSS. You resisted interrogation." Hopper nodded. 6 hours. You used pliers. Electric shock. Water. His tone was flat, factual, no emotion, just recitation. Barbie looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. Whether from illness or something else was unclear. "Yes." Hopper leaned forward. "I survived. Transferred to POW camp. Liberated in 45. Went home. Got married. Had children. Lived a full life. You tried to break me. You failed." Barbie said nothing. Hopper continued. "I came here to see what happened to you, to understand what kind of man tortures another human being and calls it duty." He paused. "Now I see. You're just a man. Old. Sick. Dying. Nothing special. Nothing extraordinary. Just a man who made choices and now lives with consequences." Barbie's jaw tightened. "I followed orders. I did my duty." Hopper shook his head. "No. You chose. Every time you picked up those tools, every time you applied pain, every time you filed a report recommending escalation. Those were choices. Your choices. Not orders. Choices. The silence returned. Barbie stared at the floor. Hopper watched him with an expression that was neither angry nor sympathetic, just observant, clinical, studying a specimen. After several minutes, Hopper stood. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here because I needed to see that you're mortal, that evil doesn't make you powerful, it just makes you human, and subject to the same end as everyone else." He turned to leave, then stopped. "They feed you here, don't they?" Barbie looked up, confused by the question. "Yes." Hopper nodded slowly. "Good. Because I remember hunger. Real hunger. POW camp hunger. Standing in line for watery soup, eating bread that was more sawdust than grain. And I remember that the people feeding me were the same people I had fought against. They could have starved us, but they didn't. They followed the law, Geneva Convention, even when we were enemies." He met Barbie's eyes directly. "That's the difference. When I was powerless, my enemies fed me according to law. When your enemies were powerless, you tortured them. That's what separates civilization from barbarism. Not nationality, not ideology, just that simple choice. Feed or starve, heal or harm, protect or destroy." Hopper left without waiting for a response. The guard escorted him out. Barbie sat alone in the infirmary, Hopper's words settling into the silence. That night, dinner arrived on a tray. Soup, bread, weak tea. Barbie looked at the food for a long time before eating. He thought about the POW camp, the American guards distributing rations, prisoners lining up, receiving food despite having fought against the very nation now feeding them. Law over vengeance, procedure over emotion. He thought about Lyon. The prisoners in his cells, the interrogation rooms, the methods he had employed. He had called it duty, professional necessity, security operations, but Hopper was right. They had been choices. Every time, every session, every report. Choices made by a man who believed ideology justified cruelty. Barbie ate slowly. The soup was lukewarm, the bread was dense, nothing remarkable, just food. Institutional rations provided because French law required prisoners be fed. Not mercy, not kindness, just law. And law was what separated civilization from chaos. He had understood that intellectually during his career. He had written reports justifying his actions within legal frameworks, security regulations, occupation authority, everything documented, everything procedural. But he had missed the essential point. Law was meant to protect the powerless from the powerful, to ensure that even enemies retained human dignity, to create boundaries that could not be crossed regardless of ideology or military necessity. He had violated those boundaries repeatedly, systematically. He had documented the violations as if documentation made them legitimate. Klaus Barbie died on September 25, 1991, in Saint-Joseph Prison, Lyon. Cancer. Complications from old age. He was 77 years old. His death certificate listed his name correctly. Klaus Barbie, not Klaus Altmann, not Albrecht Becker. The false identities were stripped away. Only the truth remained. French authorities held no state funeral, no military honours, no public ceremony. His body was cremated. Ashes were given to family members. No marker, no memorial. He disappeared from official record, leaving behind only court documents, testimony transcripts, historical archives, evidence of what he had done, evidence of what he had been. William Hopper returned to the United States after his visit to St. Joseph Prison. He gave one interview about the meeting. He explained that he had not sought revenge or closure. He had simply wanted to confirm that Barbie was human, mortal, subject to the same laws of decay as everyone else. Evil people aren't special, Hopper said. They're just people who made evil choices, and eventually those choices catch up with them. Hopper died in 1998 in Pennsylvania, surrounded by family. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II, OSS operations, captured and tortured by the Gestapo, survived, returned home, built a life. The obituary did not mention Barbie by name. It did not need to. Hopper's life was defined by what he had built, not by what he had endured. The contrast between these two men, interrogator and prisoner, torturer and victim, illustrated something fundamental about the nature of power and humanity. Barbie had wielded absolute power in Lyon, life and death decisions, torture chambers, deportation orders. He had believed that power made him important, necessary, justified. But power without moral restraint is just cruelty. And cruelty, no matter how systematically documented, remains cruelty. Barbie had tried to break Hopper in that interrogation room in April 1943. 6 hours of methodical pain. He had failed. Hopper had resisted not because he was superhuman, but because he understood something Barbie did not. That dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. When Hopper was captured, held in German POW camps, eventually liberated by advancing Allied forces, he experienced hunger, real deprivation. He stood in line for rations provided by American military authorities. Soup, bread, coffee, basic nutrition calculated to sustain life. He ate food distributed by guards who followed regulations, Geneva Convention standards, minimum caloric requirements, medical care for the sick. Those regulations existed because previous wars had demonstrated what happened without them. Starvation, disease, mass death. The international community had decided that even enemies deserved basic human treatment. Not comfort, not luxury. Just minimum standards that acknowledged shared humanity. Barbie had violated those standards, repeatedly. Not out of military necessity, but because he believed ideology justified any method. National socialism demanded total commitment. Enemies of the state deserved no protection. Resistance fighters, Jewish populations, foreign operatives, all were obstacles to be removed. The individual human being disappeared. Only categories remained: targets, threats, objectives. That dehumanization enabled systematic cruelty. When people became categories, harming them required no moral justification. It was simply processing. Efficient removal of obstacles. Barbie had been very efficient. Records documented his effectiveness. Arrests, interrogations, deportations. The numbers were impressive. From a purely administrative perspective, his tenure in Lyon was successful. But success measured in human suffering is not success. It is barbarism, disguised as efficiency. The torture sessions did not make Germany safer. The deportations did not win the war. The systematic cruelty accomplished nothing except creating more suffering in a world already drowning in it. When American forces liberated POW camps in 1945, they found thousands of German prisoners in various states of malnutrition. The camps had been overwhelmed, resources were scarce, but Allied authorities implemented feeding programs, gradually increased rations, provided medical care, not out of mercy, but because regulations required it. Prisoners were to be treated humanely. The law was clear. German prisoners, including Barbie, experienced that treatment. They received food when hungry, medical attention when sick, shelter when cold. The experience should have taught them something about civilization, about the difference between law and revenge, about choosing to follow standards even when dealing with enemies. Some German prisoners understood. They recognized that their treatment demonstrated Allied commitment to principles over hatred, law over emotion, human dignity over military, convenience. Others, like Barbie, saw it differently. They interpreted humane treatment as weakness, softness, a failure of will. Barbie never publicly acknowledged that his treatment as a prisoner contrasted sharply with his treatment of prisoners. He never stated that the food he received in Allied custody was better than the treatment he had given captured operatives. He never admitted that the law protecting him was the same law he had violated, but the contrast existed regardless of whether he acknowledged it, and that contrast illustrated the fundamental choice every person faces when given power over others. Use that power to protect or to harm, to build or to destroy, to recognize shared humanity or to deny it. Barbie chose destruction. Hopper, when given the opportunity decades later, chose simply to witness, not to inflict revenge, not to seek retribution, just to see that justice, delayed but not denied, had finally reached the man who had tortured him. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.